Mark, it's good to see you. We're
Hey.
former colleagues and we've stayed in touch for quite a while. But over the last week or so, I've noticed you posting some interesting questions on LinkedIn with the hashtag HR identity. Tell me what this is all about.
Yeah, good to see you too. Look, it's we're trying to create a conversation. I think our focus is really around the Australian organisations, and what I guess we're interested in is what's happening in HR at the moment. And within that, it's thinking about how HR is adapting to the challenges that are being faced in the talent world at the moment. From my perspective as a consultant, I've always felt quite privileged to go into organizations and support them around a whole bunch of HR issues that they might be having. And as a former HR professional, that's where I started my career. I know how important the function is to the success of the organization. So as we look at this campaign, and you're right, there's 5 or 6 questions out there at the moment. The research that we're doing is really about what's happening in HR, whether it be around tech, whether it be around process, structure, capabilities. We're interested in kind of understanding what's happening to the HR function, what they're doing, and how they're responding on their kind of transformation journey. Because in my experience, HR is kind of always on a transformation journey of some sort. Um, we know that talent is consistently a top 3 focus for the C-suite.
Yeah.
The question for me is therefore, how is HR changing, and whether it's delivering similar products in different ways, how it's utilizing the latest technology. I've seen in your posts on LinkedIn where you kind of post the different kind of job titles that you're seeing out there. So to
I
my
think,
mind,
yeah.
HR is doing something different. It's kind of like, what is it, and how does that change HR going forward?
And if people want to get involved in these questions or maybe get a wrap up of the research that you've done, how can they get involved?
So look, at the moment, it's very much around LinkedIn and kind of engaging with myself and my colleagues on LinkedIn, kind of do interviews, do these kind of conversations. We're also going to be doing some state-based events within the KPMG offices. And ultimately, I guess it's a bit different from how we've done research in the past. In the past, you'd kind of sit in a darkened room, dare I say it, and kind of come up with these great ideas and then post something, and that would be that. I guess we're looking more about having this conversation, doing this research in public, and kind of developing HR's identity with our colleagues, with our clients, and so forth. And maybe getting to the point in the future where we kind of like say, this is what we think HR's future identity looks like, but we don't want it to be a big reveal. We kind of want to see the conversation develop in public.
And who would you love to hear from or get involved in this research?
Oh, look, everyone and anyone. I mean, obviously, we're interested in talking to those who are working in HR at the moment, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be, again, the C-suite. We just want to talk to the people that are helping to shape HR. But then within that, and I think it's important from this perspective, is also to talk to HR's customers. So talk to the business,
Mm.
talk to the talent world. I mean, if you're in HR and you're shaping your talent acquisition agenda, you know, you got to be thinking about the new talent that's coming into the workforce, that's coming into the talent marketplace, and how they may be different from the talent generations that have gone previous.
Well, we're now facing the reality of having 6 generations in the workforce for the first time ever. So I'd say anyone in a kind of people and HR team, anyone leading people, anyone hiring people has probably got their work cut out for them at the moment.
Oh, 100%. I think that was something that we were having a conversation on last week around one of the questions around employee experience. You know, I don't think you can necessarily be an organization with one employee experience now. The employee experience you need for the younger generation is almost certainly going to be different from my generation and from the generation kind of before me. So this kind of one size fits all approach just is definitely not going to work within a workforce that's got 6 generations.
So just to recap on this, Mark, people can connect with you or they can look for the hashtag HR identity to have a look at the questions and get involved in the dialogue. And I guess watch this space for publications and events in a state near you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just as I say, get involved, respond to the questions that you're seeing, post questions yourselves, post comments, or just reach out directly. And we'd love to have a conversation with as many people as possible.
Fantastic. Now, I think it's only fair that we turn the tables on you, Mark, and ask you to answer a few of these questions for us. So I picked a couple of the 6 questions that you're posing as part of hashtag HR identity. So first question for you, who do you think is responsible for the employee experience?
Um, Look, I think as you get into the employee experience, I mean, there's obviously got to be somebody at some point who crafts what the intent of the employee experience is. So, I think HR definitely has a role in understanding what sort of experience the workforce want. And as we just mentioned, around potentially recognizing that there are multiple experiences required within a multi-generational workforce. HR is best placed to do that. It has the skills, it has the expertise, it has the ability to go and do the research to be able to do that. But ultimately, it's shaping the employee experience on behalf of the business, because it's the business that is looking to recruit the right people, retain the right people, engage the right people to deliver against the business objectives. Therefore, once HR has shaped an experience based on its research, based on its conversations with the business, ultimately the business and the line leaders are there to deliver an employee experience. There's no point HR describing an employee experience as X, Y, Z if the business are delivering an experience which is A, B, C.
Mm.
So whilst HR may be responsible on behalf of the business to create what the employee experience looks like, ultimately the whole leadership team, every line leader, everybody in the organization is responsible for delivering that employee experience.
So you see HR as more of a custodian and a kind of maybe an agitator. Would that be true?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you think about organizations that will be doing this well, HR will have its finger on the pulse in terms
Mm.
of the sort of employee experience that the organization should be delivering. And within that, HR will be able to recognize where that employee experience maybe isn't being delivered as well as it could and should be. You think about your culture surveys, your engagement results, and so forth. And the important thing with that is it should be a moving target. This isn't about doing an employee engagement survey once a year to find
Yeah.
out whether people are feeling engaged, whether people are recognizing the employee experience. It's about doing it on a regular basis to understand where are the pockets of the organization where maybe where maybe the employee experience isn't being delivered in a way that is intended, and maybe you're seeing pockets where you've got high levels of attrition and so forth. Ultimately, yes, there's culture, but culture is part of that experience.
I'll share one thing I did in the company that we both worked for when I wanted to sort of highlight some of the discrepancies I saw in employee experience. And this was largely the sort of digital employee experience. This was only kind
Mhm.
of one facet of it. Is when I was a few months into my employment there, is that I got a big piece of butcher's paper and I mapped out every touch point I'd had because I don't delete emails, which is a bit of a weird
Oh,
trait I
wow,
have.
actually.
And I printed off every single kind of like digital interaction I'd had for pre-boarding, onboarding, and in my first 3 or 4 months of being in the company. And I printed off every interaction I'd had and every kind of like inconsistency or frustration. And it was a really, first of all, it was humongous. It was a bit disjointed. So tone of voice and things like that were quite disjointed and it involved multiple systems. So maybe one tip I'd say is if you just want to get started, if it feels like a massive project, is just do something on paper to let people see what it looks and feels like to be on the receiving end, let's say, of some of the employee experience touch points that you received. It was quite confronting and quite amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, I read not so long ago that one of the highest points of engagement of an employee is at the moment where they sign a contract to join. And typically, there's then 4 weeks between them signing that contract and them joining. And in a lot of organizations, nobody speaks to them in those 4 weeks, apart from maybe somebody from an onboarding perspective to complete the police checks or what have you. So again, if you think from an experience, HR can design it in a way where there are some touch points. Why shouldn't that person come to a team meeting or an event or send them things, contact them, be in touch? But again, that delivery has to be by the hiring manager or by the hiring manager's team. So that's, for me, that's an example where you can design the best experience, but people have got to carry it out to enable that engagement.
I think it's not easy, but it's not impossible. And I think my personal advice is do something, get started, just map it out. If that's all you do is kind of inventory or map out what you've got now, um, just don't let the sort of hugeness of this task
Yeah.
stop you from, just even working out where you are now. I don't know if you have any other advice for people on the employee experience journey.
I think for me, it's really about being open. As a former HR professional, I can't sit here and say that I know the exact experience that each organization should be delivering for each facet of its workforce.
And each
I think,
stage of the journey,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, HR's got to be comfortable. And, I see it often around how it engages the business, how it understands where the business is going, and how it talks to its current employees, its previous employees, its future employees around what it is they're actually looking for. And I think, those leading HR functions are those that are comfortable in not necessarily knowing all the answers.
I think also they can take a leaf out of the marketing playbook. I think if you thought about your employees the way that your company thinks about its customers and
Yeah.
its physical, digital journeys, for example, I think there's a lot to be learned from that function.
Definitely, I think we'll probably talk about it a little bit when we talk about technology, but there's that aspect of how do you bring a consumer grade experience within an organization? People in the way that they interact with various organizations in their personal life, they're getting constant delivery of
Yeah.
different experiences. And quite frankly, it's that, again, consumer grade experience that they're looking to be delivered internally. So I agree. I think, looking to your marketing function, looking to those who design this for your customers are absolutely the right people to help you then think about how you shape it for your employees.
Well, let's segue into the next question then. And the question that you pose is how can HR tech get you a seat at the C-suite table? It's not just about tech though, eh? How do you see this question?
Yeah, look, I think across the set of questions, obviously we've tried to kind of create different conversations. So,
Mhm.
as we just talked about around the employee experience, and this one is really around the technology. Um, I think again, as we look at it, it's not really so much about getting a seat at the C-suite. We know that the C-suite is engaged in the conversation around talent. We know that it's a critical issue for chief execs and their leadership team. So I think HR, more often than not now, does have a seat at the top table,
Mhm.
and more often than not, it's actually reporting directly to the CEO because of its level of importance to the agenda of the organization. I think from a technology perspective, it's really, in my mind, two things. One is around that experience that we talked about. So, how is HR delivering a technological experience to employees that matches what those employees experience in their personal lives?
Yeah.
So, years ago, I was doing a transformation, and one of the chief people officers of that organization turned around and said, he'd been booking a flight to, I think it was to Rome, for he and his wife to go on holiday. And it had taken them like 3 or 4 minutes to go onto a website and book a flight.
Yeah.
And then he said he went into the HR system to try and change his address. And after about 5 minutes, gave up. And
Took three
his
business
challenge,
days.
yeah, but his challenge, and it was great, and it's really stuck with me, was, I want to be able to interact with my HR system as easy as it was for me to book a flight to Rome. And throughout the transformation, that kept on being the kind of North Star, the moment that we kept on looking back to that says, are we designing this in the simplest way that delivers that kind of experience? So I think that's the first point with technology. And I think the second is then how HR is enabling the organization through technology. So we're almost certainly going to get into a conversation around AI as we get into this and how AI is beginning to get into HR processes. And in many ways, it should be enabling better decisions. It should be enabling more efficient processes. And in time, I'm sure it will create a data-rich environment. I think we're still early in that conversation. But I think as you look at the technology, for me, it's those two sides. One is the experience side of things, and then secondly, how it's enabling the organization.
Do you think senior HR teams or CHROs should have a tech strategy?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think it's important that it's part of any wider digital strategy.
Yeah.
I don't think you want HR going off and creating its own roadmap around technology. But I think, again, where we see the leading HR organizations is those that have a digital strategy. They know where they're going. They're making sure that it's stitching together, because I think at times in HR, there's some fantastic technologies out there, and you can get a little bit can go a little bit crazy in many ways and go, oh, we're going to have one of these, we're going to have one of these, we're going to have one of these. Whereas if you've got a single strategy, you'll be looking at it going, okay, well, how does that help us on our journey? How does that help us on our journey? Rather than here's the latest, brightest, shiniest thing, let's go after that.
I think, though, having spent more time that side, I guess, of the camp than the side I am now, kind of as the co-founder of a tech product, I found, and I still find, that to some degree HR is the poor internal cousin when it comes to tech. Is that all of the tech resources, budgets, go into the kind of revenue generating, customer facing, rather than enabling functions, which HR can still be perceived as. And I find that that is often why I used to turn to vendors, because I had no choice. I had no one was really always advocating for me, or I wasn't the top of the queue when it came to resources and so on. So I kind of had to go and fend for myself. Do you still see that happening?
Well, I think so. I think the challenge is always going to be around, if you're going to invest in, let's call it the back office, whether it be HR, finance, procurement, you're competing for funds that otherwise could be spent on your kind of inverted commas front of house. I think the case for all of those functions is really proving how any investment is going to help the organization realize its objectives, and whether that's around HR being able to better attract the future workforce that the organization needs, or deliver improved learning experiences, or in many cases, quite frankly, have just better data that enables improved reporting around your HR performance, and also your people risk, which is a much greater piece. Now, I see as many investment cases around HR technology being around the people risk side of things as being around spending money on just pure play technology because we want technology.
Well, I'm going to ask you the third question before we wrap up then. So the final question I want to ask you from the six that you pose online is about learning. I'm really interested in this topic. So the question is, do your learning solutions match your company's skill requirements? Tell me what this question means, and maybe what trends that you're seeing emerging in the learning space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the first angle I'd look at this is around whether organizations are confident that they understand their future skill requirements. We've had a lot of responses already around the workforce planning side of things, and the capability of organizations to understand what those skills they need look like 12, 24 months out, or even going as far as 5, 10 years. And I think if you look here in Perth around the decarbonisation agenda, for example, within our energy and mining sector, and organisations trying to understand what that means for their workforce. I think what becomes interesting for those organisations that do have a view is then around whether they are going to buy that capability in the future, or whether they're going to develop it. I think if you get into the development side of things, we start to see organisations looking at delivering learning differently. Again, we go back to the number of generations in the workforce. The younger generation coming into the workforce don't necessarily want to sit in classrooms for 7, 8 hours a day to learn sort of set things. They want their point in time learning. My son, when he's playing his Xbox games, he's 14. If he wants to learn something, he just goes on YouTube and watches a video for 1 minute, 2 minutes, and understands what he's got to do, and then goes and puts it into practice in his game. How we do that within a workforce, I think, becomes quite interesting. How do we create point-in-time learning for individuals to pick up individual skills rather than trying to teach them a whole host of skills in one classroom-based learning?
Yeah, I think none of us have got the attention span that we used to have. I bucket myself in that list as well. Even though I'm a 40-something-year-old, I just simply don't have the time or the patience to sit through 7 hours. And I just need to know the answer point in time. And not every company's tooled up to do that, right? And not every company's maybe confident to bring in external sources of learning to complement what they deliver internally. Is anyone out there or any sector crushing it?
Look, I think you're right. And I think part of the reason for having this conversation is not necessarily to say that HR is doing a good or bad job. It's much more around understanding what are the opportunities. And as you say, where are organizations doing it well? There are some organizations that just simply don't have a workforce and a way of working that kind of suits point in time learning.
Mm.
They don't necessarily have people who are on their mobiles all the time and able to just go, oh, how do I do that? Let me look it
Yeah.
up. I'll do that. It doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And even within a workforce, you might find that you need 3 or 4 different modes of delivering learning because you've got different types of workforce. I think we're starting to see organizations who are challenging themselves that when they get to a point where they need to do some kind of learning, they're looking at doing it differently. Whether they're gamifying it, whether they're using different technology to be able to deliver it, whether they're doing it in smaller bite-sized chunks, we're definitely seeing organizations who are challenging themselves to go, okay, in a normal way, we would roll this out by getting everybody into a classroom, delivering it, and then off they go. Let's challenge ourselves and see if we can do this differently. Let's see if we can use different channels to deliver that learning. And I think that's the exciting thing for us is around, where are those leading organizations and how are they doing it? And quite frankly, is it working? Are they seeing the return on investment of delivering learning in a different way?
I've had a few really interesting conversations with people I would regard as thought leaders in the space. And the conversation a couple of times has gone down the route of the job of learning, if that makes sense. So why the organization wants people to learn skills or go through a piece of training or compliance training is evident, right? We want better people, happier people, better quality people. We have to do it for a compliance reason. There's a sort of emerging category of people who are now thinking about the job that learning does for the individual and what their motivations to learn might be. And if you can blend the two, so why would I want to learn something? Okay, maybe it makes my job less frustrating or whatever it was. But part of my incentives to want to learn are also so I can progress, so that there's something in it for me. I'm just seeing some really interesting conversations start up about connecting the dots there so that both of the whys or the win-win is created. And I'm excited to hear people speaking and thinking that way in quite a human-centered way.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you raise a good point around a lot of learning that's done within organizations is the mandatory, it's the stuff you've got to do, which in many ways isn't what kind of excites people.
No, absolutely not.
We just recruited a new team into the KPMG practice here in Perth, and I was struck by bringing on a team of, I think it's 7, 8 people. Nearly every one of them asked us around our approach to learning at KPMG and the opportunity for them to learn new and different skills.
And that's the why for individuals, right? It's
Yeah.
not so that, thank you, KPMG, we are now compliant.
No, 100%. And I think we have to accept that as employers, our employees aren't necessarily going to stay with us for the next 40 years.
Not
Those
gonna
kind of days of joining an organization and sticking with them for long periods of time, it isn't what we're seeing in the workforce. That's not theory. That is just genuinely what we're seeing in terms of the time that people stay with organizations. Therefore, yes, they want to deliver for the organization whilst they're there, but they also want to learn for themselves. They want to understand what are the skills that they can develop in this organization that may help them in their career somewhere else in the future. And I think, again, as a leader, as a team leader, I look at my team and think about how I'm helping them develop and how I'm helping them to shape their career wherever that be going forward. And learning is a key part of that.
Fantastic. Well, we got halfway through the questions. There's 3 more. Just to recap that people can connect with you on LinkedIn, Mark.
Yeah.
Colleagues, look for the hashtag HR identity to get involved in these different conversations. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to me. And let's connect again to answer the next 3 at some point. Thanks,
Yeah,
Mark.
no, fantastic. Thank you.